What is up, YouTube? Today we are going to be doing my NFL tier list going into the offseason. I want to preface this first. This is purely going into the offseason. If any big moves have happened, I have no idea about it to this point. If you want to see my quarterback rankings, I have that video out on my page. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright guys, so this is the tier list that we are going off of. Starting at the top of the tiers, we have Super Bowl favorites. Then we have playoff locks, teams that I think are guaranteed to make the playoffs. Then we have playoff contenders, teams that I think could make the playoffs but definitely aren't locks. Then we have the mid tier. Then we have the below average tier. And then the very worst tier is the number one pick contenders. But without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we have the Saints. I'm going to say mid. I think they are going to be a little better than last year just because they're going to be healthy. But as of right now, they don't really have the pieces in their roster to be any higher than this. So for now, I'm going to keep them in mid. Next up, we have the Dolphins. I'm going to put them in playoff contenders. Similar to Saints, they had a ton of injuries in the regular season. But now that they are going to be healthy, they should be a better team. And I think they're going to be a playoff contender for sure. Will they get in? I'm not 100% sure. Will they win their division? Probably not. But I do still think they're going to be a playoff contender and a team that should be taken seriously. Next up, we have the Baltimore Ravens. And to me, they are a Super Bowl favorite. They are one of the best teams in the NFC. As long as they have Lamar Jackson, they are going to be a Super Bowl contender. It's really as simple as that. Going into their second season with Zach Orr as the defensive coordinator, I don't think they're going to start off as slow as they did in the regular season last year. But yeah, I think this team's a Super Bowl contender. Next, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Oof. We're very disappointed last season, but I do think they are going to be a playoff lock this season. Now, they obviously need to focus on the defense this offseason. Their defense was one of the worst in the NFL next year. But if they can even just be mediocre next year, they'll be fine. So I think they're going to be a playoff lock. Next up, we have the Denver Broncos. I'm going to put them as a playoff contender. I don't think it's a lock. They're going to get back. But, I mean, they got there last year. Bo Nix was playing very well, and I have no reason to expect that to not continue. Next up, we have the New York Giants, and I'm going to say number one pick contention as of right now. The roster outside of Malik Neighbors is absolutely horrible. We have no reason to believe they're going to be any better next season. We don't know at this point what they're going to do in the draft, but regardless, I have no reason to believe in this team whatsoever, so they're going right at number one pick contention. Next, we have the Minnesota Vikings. I'm going to say playoff contender. Now, I understand they won 14 games last year. I really think it was a fluke because of how easy their schedule was. They didn't beat the Lions, who were the best team in their division. I don't expect that to continue again. Their division is completely stacked. I think it's going to hit them in the mouth next season. I think the Packers are going to be more prepared. I really just don't see this team getting that far. I have to put them in playoff contenders, though, just because they won 14 games last season. So it'd be ridiculous to put them any lower than that. Next, we have the Rams. I'm going to put them as a playoff contender. Really, a lot of teams in the NFC West are just like, we don't really know how good they are. We know the Rams are a good playoff team. They play well in the playoffs, but as terms of the regular season, how well they're going to be, we don't really know. They could miss the playoffs. They could go all the way to the Super Bowl. We never really know this team, so I'm going to put them in playoff contender. Next, we have the Buccaneers, another playoff contender. All this team has done recently is win their division, and I don't expect that to happen this year because I think a team like the Atlanta Falcons are going to make it. But I'm also going to put them in playoff contenders because we really don't know. Everything is saying the Falcons should win this division, but they also said that last year, and it still didn't happen. Do I expect the Falcons to win it with Michael Penix in? Yes, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm putting them both in playoff contenders. Next, we have the Detroit Lions, and I'm going to put them in Super Bowl favorites. They're one of the best teams in the NFC. Obviously had a really rough end of the season last year. Reminds me a lot of when the Ravens lost in 2019 going into the 2020 season. It was a lot of like, where do we go from here? When you're at the very top of the league, it's hard to come back next year and be like, okay, what do we do now? We just fluked in the playoffs. I think they're still a Super Bowl contender because they're just one of the best teams in the NFC straight up. It's just a fact. And until they give me a reason, I can't really put them any lower. Their roster is going to be basically the same next season anyway. Next, we have the Chicago Bears, and I'm going to say playoff contender. I know a lot of teams are in this ranking, but I promise it's not going to shape up like that. The fact is, with Ben Johnson, and they should be a pretty solid team. Caleb Williams, I think, was a lot better last year than people were even giving him credit. Their defense is pretty decent as well. I think they're overall a pretty solid team, and I won't be surprised to see them in the playoffs, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they miss it. So I'm going to say playoff contender. Actually, now that I think about it, I think that's more of a mid tier, so I'm going to put them in mid. Next up, we have the 49ers, another team going in mid. A lot of people are expecting them to go back to the playoffs. I don't know why people are expecting that. What reason have they given us that they're going to come back in the playoffs? I wouldn't be surprised if they got in, but it's also like, I'm not anticipating it whatsoever. Next up, we have the Eagles. I mean, obviously Super Bowl favorites. They won last year, so they have to be up there. The roster should be exactly the same, similar to the Lions, but the difference is they actually won the Super Bowl. Eagles are easily a Super Bowl contender. Next up, we have the Raiders. Number 1 pick contention. I think they're one of the worst teams in the NFL. Outside of Brock Bowers, they really don't have anything going for it. It looks like they're going to get rid of Max Crosby, so they're going to lose their best player. And yeah, outside of that, they're a bag of chips. Next up, we have the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to put them in playoff contender. I think they're a pretty solid team. Josh Jacobs is one hell of a running back. I think Jordan Love's a little overrated, but overall, they're a pretty solid team. I'm going to put them in playoff contender. Next up, we have the Commanders. I think they are a playoff lock. I don't see any way this team doesn't go back to the playoffs. I'm not sure they're going to win their division, but they're definitely going to be in the playoffs for sure. Could Jaden Daniels have a sophomore slump? Yeah, but I'm definitely not anticipating it. Next up, we have the Cardinals. I'm going to say below average. Every year feels like there's a moment where they look good and then they kind of just fall apart, and I don't have a reason to think that that's not going to continue. Kyler Murray, I think, is one hell of a quarterback, but outside of that, they don't really have much going for them. Next up, we have the Steelers. I'm going to say mid. I don't know where this team goes from here. Their defense is getting older. They're still a well-run defense, but they're not as good as they used to be, to the point where they were carrying their offense once before. I don't think Russell Wilson is the solution. I don't trust this offense at all. And it doesn't look like they're going to make many changes this offseason to do anything different. So as of right now, they're pretty mid. Next up, we have the Buffalo Bills, Super Bowl contender. Easily one of the best teams in the AFC. As long as they have Josh Allen, they are a contender, very similar to what I said about the Baltimore Ravens. And we'll just have to see if they can end up beating KC in the playoffs. Next up, we have the Seahawks. I have a love-hate relationship with the Seahawks. I'm going to put them in mid because I always would think every year they were going to be good. And last year was the first year where I didn't fall for it. They have so much talent, but it never produces. I don't understand why. It always feels like this team should be better than they actually are, but they never are. So I'm going to just leave them in mid because that's what they are. They're always mediocre. They're never great. They're never horrible. They're just stuck in mediocrity forever. Next up, we have the Patriots. I'm going to say below average. I don't think they're going to be a number 1 pick contention area. They're definitely one of the worst teams in the AFC at this point, but Drake May look pretty solid, and I think it's going to be good enough to put them in the below average and not number 1 overall pick contention. Next up, we have the Cleveland Browns. I'm also going to put them in below average. Feel pretty similar about them as the Patriots, except they don't have a quarterback, but they have other pieces around them that's pretty solid. Losing Myles Garrett's going to hurt, and they're not going to be a contender for the playoffs at all. I think they're going to be a bad team, but just not the worst of the worst for sure. Next up, we have the Houston Texans. They are a playoff lock for 2 reasons. 1, CJ Stroud is one hell of a quarterback. 2, their division is absolutely horrible. Like, out of these 3 teams right here, who's going to take the division from the Texans? Because I don't see any of them doing it. Next up, we have the Chiefs. They're a Super Bowl favorite because they are the Chiefs. Yeah, they lost in the Super Bowl this year, but they still got to the Super Bowl. Next up, we have the Cowboys. This might shock you guys, but I think they're a playoff lock. I think when they're healthy, they're a team that is going to be in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to win the division. I think Philly has that locked up, but I think them and the Commanders are both going to get in at wildcard spots. Next up, we have the Chargers, another team that I think is a playoff contender. I don't think it's guaranteed they get in the playoffs, but they are absolutely a team that should be there. Their division is tough, and the AFC is pretty good as a whole as well. But I trust Jim Harbaugh to at least get in the playoffs, and we'll see if they can actually overcome the playoff hump that they've had for a while. Next up, we have the Jets, another team that is just below average. Apparently, they're moving on from Rodgers, which I didn't know when I recorded my last video. But their roster overall is pretty decent, but it's nothing that's going to carry them to be a playoff contender for sure. Next up, we have the Panthers, another below average team. I know some people are jumping on the bandwagon because of Bryce Young's end of the season. I thought he played good, but I don't think it's going to be enough for this team to be a true playoff contender at all. And then for all the AFC South teams that are right here, other than the Texans, these are all going to be in the below average group. Thank you guys for watching. I would appreciate it if you subscribed. I'm posting long form content every other day, and I post shorts every single day. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you go subscribe. Check y'all out. See you later.